I thought I could leave any time, until she whispered, "You're not leaving until I say so." In that moment, everything changed, and I realized I wasn't the only one holding back. The day started like any other. I had planned a casual visit to my friend's house, expecting the usual laughter, the easy camaraderie that had marked our friendship for years. But the moment I stepped inside, something felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged in a way I couldn't immediately place. My eyes caught her, my friend's mother, standing in the kitchen, her posture effortless and elegant, framed by the warm afternoon light spilling through the windows. She was arranging a small bouquet of flowers, and the way her fingers curved around the stems spoke of a quiet precision, a confidence born from years of knowing exactly who she was. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, catching the light, and there was a faint scent of jasmine in the air, subtle, yet unmistakably hers. It wasn't just perfume. It was the kind of presence that made a room feel alive, and suddenly, I felt a flutter of awareness I hadn't expected. Our eyes met briefly, and I noticed a spark in hers, curious, observant, almost playful. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, and I realized I was no longer just visiting a friend's home. I was intruding into something more. As I moved through the living room, she excused herself to fetch something from another room. I followed instinctively, though I told myself it was only politeness. That's when it happened, a small, accidental touch. My hand brushed against hers as we both reached for the same object. The contact was brief, fleeting, but electric in its subtlety. Her hand was warm, steady, and for a heartbeat, I felt a strange, grounding calm in the brush of her skin. I stepped back, trying to ignore the rush of adrenaline that surprised me, and muttered something about the item we were both reaching for. She smiled, a small, knowing smile, and the corner of her lips hinted at amusement, and something more I couldn't yet name. I took a seat in the living room, trying to focus on my friend and our conversation, but my attention kept drifting back to her. I noticed how she moved around the house with ease, every step measured yet unhurried. The sunlight highlighted the curve of her neck as she leaned to adjust a cushion on the sofa, and I found myself observing her not as a mother of a friend, but as a woman with a presence that demanded notice. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the tension was there, like the quiet hum of electricity before a storm. Even small gestures became charged with meaning. When she handed me a cup of tea, our fingers brushed again, lingering just a fraction longer than necessary. I felt my pulse quicken, but I reminded myself, this was nothing. Yet the warmth of her hand and the quiet steadiness of her gaze planted the first seed of something unfamiliar in me, curiosity, and perhaps the beginning of desire. By the time my friend returned to the room, the moment had passed, yet the tension lingered, woven into the space between us. I didn't know it yet, but this ordinary visit was about to become anything but ordinary. And in the back of my mind, a single thought kept repeating, something in her wanted me to stay, and I wasn't sure I wanted to leave. After that first subtle spark, the next few hours felt both ordinary and charged with an invisible current. My friend had wandered off to handle something, leaving the two of us in the living room. I tried to focus on small talk, on neutral topics like books and music, but every time our eyes met, I felt a flutter I couldn't ignore. There was a deliberate softness in her gaze, a way she studied me as if she were trying to understand the contours of my thoughts without asking a single question. She moved around the room with quiet grace, her presence filling the space in a way that was impossible to ignore. When she leaned over the table to adjust a stack of papers, her hair fell forward, brushing against her shoulder, and I found myself mesmerized by the gentle sway of it. Each movement was understated, yet somehow magnetic. Even the way she laughed at a joke I didn't fully understand caused a ripple of warmth to spread through me. It was the kind of laughter that touched the soul, not loud or boisterous, but lingering and sincere. Our conversation wandered naturally, touching on memories of my friend's childhood, favorite books, and life lessons she had learned over the years. But even in the casual rhythm of words, there was tension, subtle, persistent. Her hand would occasionally rest lightly on the counter or the back of the chair near me, and though it was never more than a brush, it left a trace of warmth on my skin. Each time I caught her glance, there was a quiet intensity there, a question unspoken, a pull I wasn't supposed to notice but couldn't look away from. I noticed small details I hadn't before: the gentle curve of her wrist as she stirred her tea, the way her shoulders relaxed when she smiled, and the faint tremor in her voice when she recounted a poignant memory. Each observation stirred a mixture of admiration and something more complex, the beginnings of an emotional attraction that felt almost forbidden, yet tantalizingly real. My thoughts betrayed me, lingering on the warmth of her presence, the subtle heat of her hand as it passed near mine, the softness in her voice that seemed to wrap around me like a gentle embrace. At one point, she leaned closer to read the label on a book I was holding, and her proximity made my heart beat faster. Her shoulder brushed mine lightly, sending a shiver of awareness down my spine. She pulled back smoothly, but the moment lingered between us, unspoken yet profoundly felt. It was as if the world had momentarily shrunk to the space we occupied, charged with unacknowledged tension and curiosity. By the time my friend returned, the subtle connection between us had grown undeniable. Neither of us acknowledged it outright, yet the weight of our unspoken attraction hung in the air, quietly demanding attention. I left that afternoon with my mind spinning, caught between guilt, admiration, and a growing desire I barely understood. The slow burn had begun, and I knew, even then, that things would never be quite the same when I returned. After that first subtle spark, the next few hours felt both ordinary and charged with an invisible current. My friend had wandered off to handle something, leaving the two of us in the living room. I tried to focus on small talk, on neutral topics like books and music, but every time our eyes met, I felt a flutter I couldn't ignore. There was a deliberate softness in her gaze, a way she studied me as if she were trying to understand the contours of my thoughts without asking a single question. She moved around the room with quiet grace, her presence filling the space in a way that was impossible to ignore. When she leaned over the table to adjust a stack of papers, her hair fell forward, brushing against her shoulder, and I found myself mesmerized by the gentle sway of it. Each movement was understated, yet somehow magnetic. Even the way she laughed at a joke I didn't fully understand caused a ripple of warmth to spread through me. It was the kind of laughter that touched the soul, not loud or boisterous, but lingering and sincere. Our conversation wandered naturally, touching on memories of my friend's childhood, favorite books, and life lessons she had learned over the years. But even in the casual rhythm of words, there was tension, subtle, persistent. Her hand would occasionally rest lightly on the counter or the back of the chair near me, and though it was never more than a brush, it left a trace of warmth on my skin. Each time I caught her glance, there was a quiet intensity there, a question unspoken, a pull I wasn't supposed to notice but couldn't look away from. I noticed small details I hadn't before: the gentle curve of her wrist as she stirred her tea, the way her shoulders relaxed when she smiled, and the faint tremor in her voice when she recounted a poignant memory. Each observation stirred a mixture of admiration and something more complex, the beginnings of an emotional attraction that felt almost forbidden, yet tantalizingly real. My thoughts betrayed me, lingering on the warmth of her presence, the subtle heat of her hand as it passed near mine, the softness in her voice that seemed to wrap around me like a gentle embrace. At one point, she leaned closer to read the label on a book I was holding, and her proximity made my heart beat faster. Her shoulder brushed mine lightly, sending a shiver of awareness down my spine. She pulled back smoothly, but the moment lingered between us, unspoken yet profoundly felt. It was as if the world had momentarily shrunk to the space we occupied, charged with unacknowledged tension and curiosity. By the time my friend returned, the subtle connection between us had grown undeniable. Neither of us acknowledged it outright, yet the weight of our unspoken attraction hung in the air, quietly demanding attention. I left that afternoon with my mind spinning, caught between guilt, admiration, and a growing desire I barely understood. The slow burn had begun, and I knew, even then, that things would never be quite the same when I returned. It was late afternoon when the unexpected happened. My friend had run out for an errand, leaving me alone with her for the first time since I arrived. The house, usually filled with chatter, felt quiet and intimate, the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the distant rustle of leaves outside the window filling the space. I was nervous, more aware of her presence than ever, though I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than a trick of the imagination. She asked for help carrying a stack of grocery bags from the front porch into the kitchen. I followed, bracing myself against the weight of the bags, and our arms brushed accidentally, a fleeting touch, yet enough to send a subtle shock through me. Her hand lingered near mine for a second longer than necessary as she adjusted the bags, and I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. I caught a glimpse of her profile as she moved past me, the soft curve of her jaw, the gentle lift of her eyelashes, and the way her hair fell just so over her shoulders. Each detail seemed magnified in the quiet of that moment. A sudden clap of rain against the windows forced us back inside. She guided me toward the kitchen, lightly pressing a hand against my back to steer me away from slipping on the wet porch tiles. The warmth of her palm was steady and grounding, yet it made my pulse quicken in a way I didn't expect. I realized then how close we were, our shoulders almost touching, the scent of her perfume mingling with the earthy freshness of the rain. I tried to focus on something practical, anything, but it was impossible. Every small movement, every glance, felt loaded with meaning. We paused near the kitchen counter to set the bags down, standing side by side. The silence between us was comfortable, yet charged, a quiet tension that neither of us addressed directly. I noticed the way she tilted her head slightly when she spoke, the subtle curve of her lips when she smiled, and the way her eyes softened whenever they met mine. Each detail drew me further into a state of awareness I couldn't control. I felt a sudden, jarring mix of emotions, guilt, excitement, curiosity, and admiration, all coiling tightly in my chest. I knew the rules, the boundaries, and yet in that brief, ordinary moment they seemed irrelevant. Her presence was magnetic, and the small brush of her arm against mine left me caught between hesitation and longing. Finally she spoke, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, calm, yet there was an unspoken insistence beneath the words. "Careful with that," she said, not looking at me directly, but I felt the attention in every syllable. I nodded, my throat dry, and when I glanced at her, our eyes met for just a fraction longer than necessary. That fleeting connection, an accidental brush, a lingering look, hung in the air like a promise of something unspoken. By the time my friend returned, the tension had shifted. It was no longer subtle curiosity, it had become an awareness of something deeper, something that neither of us could ignore. That brief encounter, ordinary yet charged with intimacy, left me unsettled, eager, and strangely unable to look away. I realized then that this slow burn was gathering heat, and that I was already caught in it. The house had quieted down for the evening. My friend had retreated to his room, leaving the living area dimly lit and almost serene. The soft glow from the lamp cast gentle shadows across the furniture, painting the room with a warmth that made every corner feel private, insulated from the outside world. I was still processing the tension from earlier, from our accidental touches and lingering glances, when she appeared in the doorway. She moved with her usual calm, but there was a different weight in her eyes tonight, something deliberate, something searching. "Mind if I sit?" she asked softly, gesturing to the couch. I shook my head, words failing me, and she settled beside me. The air between us felt heavier, charged with an unspoken anticipation. Her presence was soothing yet unsettling all at once. I could feel the subtle warmth of her body next to mine, her hair brushing lightly against my shoulder as she adjusted her position. The simple closeness, so ordinary and domestic, sent an unexpected ripple of awareness through me. For a few moments we said nothing, just sharing the space. I could feel her breathing, calm, measured, and somehow intimate. My mind raced, aware of the gravity of this moment even before she spoke. Then, leaning slightly closer, her voice dropped to a whisper, soft but unwavering. "You're not leaving until I say so." Her words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. There was no anger, no forcefulness, just quiet, commanding insistence. My heart thumped in my chest, a mixture of shock, excitement, and something I hadn't yet named. I swallowed, trying to maintain composure, but her gaze held me in place, steady and knowing. There was a weight to her eyes, a combination of vulnerability and quiet authority that made me feel both grounded and unmoored. She shifted slightly, her hand brushing against mine as she reached for a mug of tea. The touch was light, almost incidental, but it carried a warmth that lingered long after her fingers had moved away. I realized that this wasn't about forcing me to stay physically. It was about connection, about drawing me into a space where honesty and emotion mattered more than appearances or social boundaries. I tried to speak, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I let myself simply observe her, the soft curve of her cheek, the way her eyes glimmered in the lamplight, the quiet strength in her posture. Every detail made the room feel smaller, more intimate, more dangerous in the most exhilarating way. In that single whisper, everything shifted. The casual curiosity of my earlier visits transformed into a tangible emotional tension. I was no longer a visitor. I was someone she wanted to hold close, someone she trusted with a secret unspoken but deeply felt. My chest tightened with anticipation, and I understood, without her saying more, that our dynamic had changed irreversibly. When she finally leaned back and smiled faintly, the spell of the moment lingered. I didn't know what would happen next, or how to navigate the complex emotions she had stirred in me. All I knew was that I was caught, willingly, in the gravity of her presence, and that leaving, even for a moment, would feel impossible without her permission. The evening stretched on, quiet but not empty. After her whispered declaration, the room no longer felt like just a living space. It had transformed into a sanctuary of sorts, a place where unspoken truths seemed safer to surface. I sat across from her on the couch, still tense from the intensity of our last moment, yet drawn in by an unexplainable sense of curiosity and trust. She sipped her tea thoughtfully, and I realized that for the first time, I was seeing a side of her beyond grace and composure, a side that was quietly human, tender, and real. "I haven't really talked to anyone about this," she said softly, her voice hesitant but calm. There was no drama in her tone, only quiet sincerity. I leaned in slightly, listening, sensing that she was about to share something personal. The warmth of the tea between my hands contrasted with the tension of my pulse, making me acutely aware of the proximity we shared. She spoke of small vulnerabilities first, the loneliness she sometimes felt, the quiet anxieties of adulthood, the parts of life she had mastered externally but still felt uncertain about internally. Her words were measured, each one deliberate yet infused with subtle emotion. I noticed how her fingers occasionally brushed the rim of her cup, the faintest tremor betraying the depth of what she was revealing. Even in vulnerability, there was elegance, and it was mesmerizing. I found myself offering quiet reassurances, sharing small truths about my own uncertainties and dreams. It was a conversation I hadn't expected, a bridge forming between our lives that felt both natural and profound. The intimacy wasn't physical yet, but it was palpable, a slow, steady connection that made the room feel smaller, warmer, and safer than it had moments ago. At one point, our hands brushed across the couch armrest. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, her fingers lingered near mine, a subtle invitation to closeness. The brief warmth sent a shiver through me, a silent acknowledgement of the tension that had been building over the past days. Our eyes met, and in that glance, a quiet understanding passed between us, an awareness that the emotional boundary between us had shifted, but that respect and care remained paramount. The conversation turned to lighter topics, yet even in humor, the connection persisted. I noticed how she tilted her head when she smiled, how the corners of her eyes crinkled in a way that was endearing yet subtly captivating. Every gesture, every pause, reinforced a slow burn of attraction and understanding. I realized that it wasn't just curiosity or desire, it was admiration for her depth, her vulnerability, and the quiet strength she carried. By the time the conversation drew to a close, I felt something had changed between us irreversibly. There was no rush, no pressure, only a growing recognition of trust and emotional intimacy. I knew the tension, the curiosity, and the attraction weren't fleeting, they had become part of the texture of our interactions. That night, as I left the room to give her space, I carried with me a sense of connection I hadn't anticipated, a gentle, warming tether that promised the slow, unfolding journey we were both entering together. The days that followed were quiet, yet each encounter carried an unspoken weight. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was in the little things that our connection deepened. Cooking together became an unexpectedly intimate ritual. She would lean close over the counter, her elbow brushing mine as we chopped vegetables, and the small contact sent a warm shiver through me. The scent of fresh herbs mingled with the faint trace of her perfume, making the kitchen feel like a private world where only we existed. Even mundane chores became opportunities for closeness. I would help her carry laundry, our hands occasionally touching as we folded clothes together, the simple warmth lingering in a way that was hard to ignore. When she laughed at a minor mishap, a shirt slipping from my hands, the sound was soft yet intoxicating, wrapping around me and settling in my chest. These small, domestic moments carried a slow, deliberate tension, a closeness that was both comforting and thrilling. One evening, we found ourselves sitting side by side on the porch, watching the rain streak down the windows. The world outside seemed muted, and the dim glow of the lamplight made her features softer, almost ethereal. She brushed a damp strand of hair behind her ear, and I noticed how her eyes held a depth that went beyond conversation, a quiet invitation to share thoughts without words. My shoulder occasionally brushed hers, and each time, a ripple of awareness passed between us. It wasn't physical desire that defined these moments, but emotional magnetism, an invisible thread pulling us closer. She began sharing small memories, trips she'd taken, dreams she once had, and experiences that shaped her. I listened intently, sometimes sharing my own stories in return, and slowly, the walls between us eroded. Vulnerability became a shared space, and I realized that the more I learned about her, the stronger the pull of admiration and quiet affection became. Every laugh, every pause, every lingering glance made it harder to see her simply as a friend's mother. She was a woman whose presence left a lasting imprint on my thoughts and heart. There were moments of almost unbearable awareness. A gentle touch on my arm as she guided me through a crowded room, a lingering hand on my shoulder when she offered reassurance, the simple way her gaze followed mine during conversation. These small gestures carried weight far beyond their physicality. Each one intensified the unspoken tension, a slow crescendo building between us. By the time our shared moments became routine, it was clear that something profound had blossomed. We didn't need words to define it. It existed in the warmth of proximity, the quiet understanding in our eyes, and the delicate balance between desire and restraint. I found myself anticipating every moment with her, acutely aware of her subtle gestures and the emotional resonance of even the smallest contact. That slow, simmering connection had reached its emotional peak. We were no longer just two people sharing space. We had become entwined in a delicate dance of intimacy, each gesture and glance carrying meaning. And yet, beneath it all, respect and restraint remained. The tension was charged, but it was human, warm, and profoundly real. In those shared moments, I understood that what we had was rare, fragile, and utterly consuming. The final evening of my visit arrived with a quiet inevitability. The house had settled into its familiar rhythm, shadows stretching softly across the walls as the sun dipped low in the sky. I had spent the day helping around the house, sharing small laughs and gentle touches, yet an unspoken awareness hung between us. The slow burn that had grown steadily over days was ready to find its natural resting place. She found me in the living room, where I was idly flipping through a book. Her steps were measured, graceful, and I felt the familiar stir of anticipation at her presence. Without a word, she sat beside me, close enough that our knees brushed lightly, a contact so subtle yet so full of meaning. The warmth of her arm next to mine, the gentle tilt of her head as she studied the book I held, made the room feel smaller, safer, and infinitely more intimate. For a few moments, we simply existed together, the kind of quiet companionship that carried more weight than words ever could. Then, she turned toward me, her eyes meeting mine with a depth I hadn't seen before, vulnerability and understanding shining through, tempered by her quiet confidence. "I'm glad you stayed," she whispered, her hand resting lightly near mine on the arm of the couch. The simple contact sent a ripple of emotion through me, a mixture of relief, affection, and recognition of the bond we had nurtured. We talked, not about boundaries or forbidden desire, but about the subtle ways our time together had mattered. She shared a small, personal confession about her life, a moment of vulnerability I felt honored to witness. I responded honestly, revealing feelings and thoughts I had kept close, a silent promise of trust and respect. In that space, we acknowledged our connection without forcing labels or rushing to define it. It was real, human, and emotionally complete. Then came the gentle physical gestures that marked the emotional resolution. A brief hug, her arms slipping around my shoulders, her cheek brushing lightly against mine, conveyed warmth and care without overstepping any boundary. Our fingers brushed once more, briefly lingering as if to savor the moment. Even sitting close in companionable silence, I could feel the steady rhythm of her presence, the weight of our shared understanding. Each touch, glance, and pause spoke volumes, leaving no need for words. As I prepared to leave, we walked to the door together. She gave a small, knowing smile, and in that instant, the complexity of our relationship felt complete. The emotional journey, curiosity, tension, hesitation, and connection had reached a natural and satisfying close. I left not with longing, but with gratitude and a sense of warmth that would linger long after the goodbye. Even as I stepped outside, the echo of her presence stayed with me, the softness of her voice, the warmth of her hand, the intimacy of shared moments that had unfolded slowly, deliberately, and beautifully. Our connection was undeniable, yet it remained grounded in respect, mutual understanding, and emotional depth. In the end, the story wasn't about crossing boundaries or breaking rules. It was about noticing, feeling, and honoring the quiet, powerful connection between two people, a slow-burn intimacy that left both of us changed, enriched, and profoundly aware of the subtle ways love and affection could exist, unspoken yet deeply felt.